I believe that we grew up as Catholics as a result of the Council's challenge. Consequently, I have always been far more focused on what kind of Catholic the Council helped me to become than with the contemporary self-absorption of being a public square Catholic. The joy and hope, the grief and anguish of the men of our time, especially those who are poor and afflicted in any way, are the joy and the hope, the grief and the anguish of the followers of Christ as well. Nothing that is genuinely human fails to find echo in their hearts. These words, crafted on the wings of the Holy Spirit of God in the pastoral constitution of the Church in the modern world 4 decades ago in the Second Vatican Council, electrified the Church and a fresh generation of believers. Gaudium et Spes, joy and hope, as the document is known, was an explosion of hope in the future and the vehicle through which the Church sought to recalibrate its self-understanding for the last portion of the 20th century and beyond. Pope John XXIII put a new word on the lips of the Church, aggiornamento, the process of bringing things up to date within the Church. It became a spiritual coming of age for many of us who were young and starting our families back then. Do you remember? We thrilled at the introduction of the vernacular. When was the last time anyone mentioned that word? Worshiping and celebrating the sacraments in everyday language of life appeared radical for many, but who would ever trade the comforting words of the faith in a language that you could understand? It just made sense. And can you remember when the great controversies at the time revolved around guitar masses? For many of us, more than 4 decades after the close of the Council, it might appear that the present Ratzinger papacy has begun to backslide somewhat on fundamental issues like the use of the vernacular, especially with the Pope's promulgation of the usus antiquior. That's letting people have the old rite restored in Latin. And as you can just tell, I do not know Latin, but I tried. But it's the whole shebang. This was supposed to attract the disobedient Lefebvres and lure them back to us from a schism, until one of their bishops opened his mouth publicly recently and denied the Holocaust. Please, what idiocy is at work here? If you have ever come upon any sites in cyberspace dedicated to bringing back the old liturgy, old vestments, old chants, and old ways of being Catholic, you will see a lot of happy, contented men. I told Sister I was going to mention that. Mostly all in vestry of the pre-council era. Women are harder to find in these photos. It seems, with all the men in the sanctuary, there is little room left for women there. The laity, in general, appear to have happily returned to their proper pew space. They let the clergy return to their place behind the rail. Everyone knows their place. No confusion of roles here. Obedient, non-contradicting layfolk slip back into roles they occupied in the Eisenhower era, before the changes brought on by Vatican II, John XXIII, and Paul VI. Are they happy looking at Father's back? All this reminds me of something Eudora Welty wrote. Never think you've seen the last of anything. 40 years ago, the Swiss theologian Hans Kung published his remarkable analysis on the future of the church called Truthfulness. He wrote these reflections as various factions in ecclesiastical leadership in the post-council era were still sabotaging the strides that were being made in renewal. None more egregious than the machinations behind Humanae Vitae, the papal encyclical ending the debate on birth control for Catholics. When was the last time someone mentioned that? Kung lamented the exciting participation of the laity in the dialogue that was so promising and then was simply disregarded. He asked some pointed questions in light of the political maneuverings at the time by those opposed to artificial methods. Truthfulness was Kung's look into the world yet to be, the one we're presently living in. And he posited what was his deepest hope, an unshakable hope, he called it, that the Catholic Church will emerge renewed even from the post-conciliar crisis. Truthfulness carried his insistence that greater things yet must be realized in order to lead up to the future of the Church, for which the Second Vatican Council has supplied goals, programs, and impulses, he says. Kung, you might recall, was a theological expert, an advisor at the Council. So, too, was his German friend, Joseph Ratzinger. I bring this small but influential work up to you this evening because Kung and I appear to have come to the same point of conclusion, through largely different journeys, however. The conclusion is this: truthfulness, small t, is the future of the Church. This is more than anything should be the goal and the spirit of the post-conciliar Church, even 40 years later. And I can say this, that truthfulness, both as virtue and gift of the Spirit, is the only way out of whatever troubles the Church presently faces, whether it is the sexual abuse of minors by some members of the clergy, or pastors who cook the books, or the falling numbers of mass-goers, or the dwindling of vocations and lack of clergy to staff the many parishes, or the emotional closure of parishes across the country, or the treatment of women over the centuries. Truthfulness, my friends, is the light that leads to the Lord. Personally, I believe we have nothing to fear from the truth as a Catholic, as a justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, or as a mom. St. Thomas Aquinas says it best: all that is true, by whomsoever it has been said, has its origins in the Spirit. This is what Kung suggests in his treatise, acknowledging that there was a fresh passion for truthfulness in the 20th century, and admitting that there had been a historical disregard for truthfulness over the centuries in the Church, highlighting that truthfulness is a demand of the message of Jesus, and finally admitting that truthfulness can be both a challenge and a danger, for we must live with the truth we uncover. Truthfulness is necessary in moving from virtue to doctrine, from ideal to practice, but it also is an essential practical component of reform, both ecclesiastical and personal. I say this to you this evening, not to elaborate on Father Kung's personal theology, but rather